I gotta tell you, that night is still fresh as the morning dew in my mind. I was new, green as grass, just started as a ranger in the Allegheny National Forest. Jerry, my partner, was an old hand, been doing this for years, the kind of guy who's so at home in the woods that he makes Daniel Boone look like a city slicker. Anyway, we were out doing some trail maintenance, the usual stuff, fixing signs, clearing brush, that kind of thing. It was then I saw it. This thing. It was like a dog, but not just any dog. Picture a hound on steroids with something wild, fierce, and straight up feral about it. It had these eyes, I swear they were almost human, glowing like burning coals. And it was huge. Werewolf sounds crazy, but that's the only thing I could compare it to. The sight of it raised the hair on the back of my neck. Jerry saw it too. I remember his face going white as a sheet. "That ain't right," he muttered, clutching the handle of his spade a little tighter. But the creature was gone as quick as it appeared, melting into the underbrush like a shadow. By the time night fell, we had almost convinced ourselves it was a trick of the light or some exotic critter escaped from a zoo. We were in this little cabin, way out on the trails, the kind of place that gets so dark at night you can't see your hand in front of your face. Now you've got to understand something about the forest at night. It's not quiet like you might think. It's alive with sounds. Wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, distant hoots and caws. But this was different. This was a growl. It was low and throaty, almost like the rumble of an earthquake. It started quiet, then grew louder, closer. Jerry and I exchanged glances. That growl, it wasn't like anything we'd ever heard. It seemed to vibrate in our chests, get under our skin. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to bolt, but we were in the middle of the forest, miles from anywhere. Then there were scratches, long, deliberate, at the cabin door. The sound sent shivers down my spine. I remember grabbing a flashlight and a hunting knife. That was all we had. Jerry was clutching an old axe, his knuckles white. We were both wide-eyed and silent, listening, waiting. We weren't top of the food chain anymore. I don't know how long it prowled outside, taunting us with its presence. An hour, maybe two? Felt like a dang eternity. Finally, the scratching stopped, and that terrifying growl faded into the distance. We didn't sleep a wink that night. Come morning, we found the outside of the door covered with claw marks, each one as long as my hand. That's when we knew. It wasn't our imagination. It wasn't a joke. There was something out there, something we couldn't explain. To this day, every howl in the distance, every rustle in the bushes, I think about that night. But I'm still here, doing my job, just with one eye always watching, always waiting for that thing to return. They buried it. Not physically, you know. But they did everything in their power to make sure that the thing I saw was forgotten. I haven't forgotten. I guess they're just counting on the fact that no one is going to believe my story. So far, they've been right. Nothing haunts me more than that. Not the encounter itself, not the aftermath. What haunts me is knowing that no matter what, my truth will always be considered a lie. That encounter is such a big part of me now. You might as well call my entire life these days a fabrication. The nightmares, the cold sweats, the distrust. Is all of it a lie? And for what? Do you think I thrive on the looks I get when the details start to slip out? You think I enjoy being called crazy? You think I liked watching my family and friends turn their backs on me? I didn't. But I know who did. The same government bodies who came out to help me. The same ones who said they were there to save my life, to record my story and ensure that I'd be heard. I can't tell you exactly who they were. I'm sure you can piece it together. I string the wrong sequence of keywords together, though, and they'll be knocking at my door at 2 in the morning. I'd rather not deal with them again. The phone calls and the cars following me home from the grocery store are enough interference for me. I don't need any more. When I was still with the Park Service, I thought it made me part of something. I thought it meant I was on the same team as the rest of the government, contributing to making this country something beautiful. I thought it meant I'd have allies. I was an idiot then. One afternoon on a sweltering but insignificant day, I came across an abandoned campsite. Everyone had checked out of the park as far as I knew, and there were no reports of squatters in the area. I checked our records, and sure enough, someone had been there. They'd left that morning, though. Left in a hurry, I guess. I sorted my way through the damage to find out why. I had to tally up the details, after all. Figure out how big of a fine they'd be looking at for leaving so much of their property and debris behind in our park. But as I was lifting the lip of a tossed backpack, something growled nearby. It wasn't a bear or a big cat. It wasn't a wild dog or a wolf. I knew what those calls sounded like. This was different. It was deeper. It felt heavy, seeping in through my ears and weighing down my brain with dread. It pushed my usual bravery down into the dirt. I swallowed the nerves building in my throat and turned to search the tree line. I had to face it, right? Much to my surprise, the growl hadn't come from an animal. It had come from a man. There was a man in those trees, standing close to 7 feet tall. That was enough to dwarf me. I was already prepared to run. His wardrobe is what gave me pause. He was dressed in something like a ghillie suit. Those things snipers wear, you know? They lay down in the earth and completely disappear. This one looked like hair. Wiry ropes of reddish-orange fibers draped every inch of his body, concealed his face almost completely. I could barely make out the flat nose and cracked lips that made up his lower face. The skin there was deeply wrinkled. It had to be a costume, right? I only doubted that when it roared. It bellowed at me and started to move forward. Something deep in my bones, call it instincts or fight or flight, whatever. Some deep part of me knew I had to leave. I had to run. Clear out of there and save my own skin before I got wrapped up in whatever had come wandering out of the woods. And I got out of there safely. Not a scratch on me. Does that make the story worse somehow? I called my superiors and reported what I saw, continuing to insist that it was just a man. I tried to get in contact with the camper who had left that site in the morning. I still haven't heard from them. It was a different agency who got back to me, the same ones I mentioned at the start. They wrote down all the details, assured me that what I had to say was important, and then they disappeared. My job disappeared with them. Word got around that I was delusional, unsafe, and insubordinate. I don't know where those stories came from, but I do know that they stuck. I was blacklisted in some way. I couldn't return to any stretch of government work. I couldn't contact my former peers, who avoided me like I had the plague. And the more I pushed, the more the agents came back around. The cars in my rearview mirror, the heavy breathing on the other end of the phone. It's like they want to keep me paranoid. They want to keep me rattled. They want my life to be just as unbelievable as it was that day in the woods. The longer they keep me on edge, the more I talk about the phone tap and the black vehicles, the less reliable I become. Suddenly I've imagined it all. There's no one following me. There's no one calling. And that means there couldn't have been someone in the park that day, right? That means whatever I saw probably didn't exist. When those realizations sink in, the result is always the same. Whoever's listening starts to laugh. I don't blame them, though. That's the deep part of them, isn't it? It's easier to disregard the story than it is to believe it. After all, what if I was wrong? What if that hadn't been a man at all? What if it was something else? I was working as a forest ranger up here in Anchorage when this happened. My job at the time was to patrol the remote areas of the park, making sure nobody ever lit fires they weren't supposed to or threw litter where they weren't supposed to. I was equipped with my own radio and had a rifle with me at all times in case I had to deal with any squatters or crazy people who came into the woods looking to do bad things. It was just before midnight on a Friday evening. I had been patrolling an area called Barney Creek. I hadn't noticed anything unusual happening, so I wasn't expecting anything bad to happen that night. But all that completely changed when I found a deceased person, a skeleton. More on that in just a second. On my way back to my car is when I saw this body lying across the trail that I'd been walking on. At first I thought it was maybe an animal due to the condition that the body was in. But as I got closer and looked again, I realized it wasn't a bear corpse or any other animal from the woods. This was obvious because there was no fur covering its flesh. It had obviously died quite a while ago too. After shining my flashlight around the area more thoroughly with a sense of growing apprehension tapping into whatever bravery might be needed, I slowly approached the remains. I took out my camera before beginning to take pictures of the evidence. I was not prepared for what I saw when I moved closer in to take a look at the skull. It was pretty badly rotted, and there appeared to be a bullet hole right behind the left eye socket. Some brutal execution must have happened, maybe even torture, judging by how bony and ripped out their chest area looked. Whoever they were, somebody wanted them dead, and the killer would not accept any opposition from this person they were going after. This meant that whoever killed them was still around, and they'd be coming back. They could have been waiting out for me in the forest, possibly planning to take out their sick revenge on me. I had one mission: to get out of there as soon as possible and alert the authorities for backup. I had to run back as fast as I could, which was hard with how freaked out and terrified I was. Still getting lost and having a hard time recognizing the trails. My head was a mess, and every time a branch or leaf would brush against me, I just suspected it was something that would kill me. Kind of like a monster's claw reaching up from behind bushes, ready to grab me by the neck and snap it like a twig. My heart raced with so much fear that I swear it felt as if it were almost going to pop out of my chest. Without any warning at all, and after what seemed like forever, I got far away but just collapsed onto the forest floor, completely exhausted. I was there until morning. As soon as morning arrived, I was successful in returning to the area, but the remains were gone. I couldn't tell if somebody had come in and taken them, or maybe some animal decided to bury the body under some dirt or leaves. In any case, it didn't matter much because no one was going to find out who killed that person. But I realized afterwards, whoever did it might have been looking for me now, too. It's best not to say anything about my experience now while I'm still working as a ranger. Look, I don't know what happened, but here in Alaska at night, those skeletal remains still haunt me. I've never seen a cadaver at all, let alone in that bad condition, but all I can say is, why didn't everybody just stay away from this area? Why did this happen? Who's this poor soul that got killed? It definitely looked malicious, like somebody had just left the body there. I mean, that's kind of obvious. Had it been an animal, it would have been eaten or torn apart or buried. But the body had been there for a while and there were no signs of any animals even touching it. How strange, almost paranormal, if you will. My sighting happened in June of 2012. My father was undergoing chemo, and I decided to bring him out canoeing for an afternoon trip. We headed downriver to a secluded spot that we had been to once before. On our way there, my dog started acting funny, sniffing the ground and barking. That's when this large lizard thing began coming out of the trees. I began screaming, pointing at this creature, wondering what we were seeing. My father grabbed our canoe paddles and I began screaming for him to paddle us away. But this thing kept coming towards us. Now, it was slithering quickly through the water toward us like some big water snake. Not swimming, though. More flowing, until it was only about 10 feet away from the canoe. Its head and body were above the water line. Then my dad reached in his pocket or something. I heard a gunshot go off, and a spray of blood shot out of this creature. The sight made me almost vomit. Then it just sank down under the water. I blacked out after that for some time in complete and utter terror. The next thing I know, we are at our destination, and my father is asking if I'm okay. That's when he tells me what happened. I'm shooting this creature, and then this thing disappearing underneath the water, and I had fainted. I was so terrified. My dad explained to me something large had come through us and added the water. He wasn't sure what it was. My dad was pale. I mean, I've never seen him like that before. Now, fast forward 15 years later, and my oldest son believes he's seen a similar creature when he was out in the forest with his own friends. He was rounding up this group of kids when he saw something that looked like a lizard. He said it stared at him for a moment, and when they all became aware of what he was seeing, the creature darted off. My son, who is now 21, has never told anybody about this until I mentioned my own sighting to him, not knowing if it was the same thing. It's weird because his friends and parents had reported strange, large, three-toed tracks around their house at nighttime. They would find these large feces piles as well as large scratches along the house and trees. I can only suspect it's this thing hanging around here. Look, I don't know if we somehow stumbled upon its territory or what, but I know it's here. My son has also seen it several more times since his initial sighting. The last time was not too long ago. He said this thing is beginning to get very, very violent. It's been destroying people's property, attacking and killing dogs. I'm still in shock by what we all saw those years ago, and never once did I ever believe in this kind of thing until that day. Now, I know for sure it existed and will continue to exist. I know I'm going to be attacked for what I'm saying, but if there's anybody else out there that has seen this thing, let me know. We need some answers. Halloween brings out the weirdos. We all know by now, right? The season seeps into their veins and compels them to act. They cause a scene in public. They catch your eye and make you wonder. Maybe they get behind the wheel and cause an accident. It's as common as it is frustrating. I work in a parking garage, and even there I see all sorts. In the fall, a seasonal haunted house opens up across the street and it acts like a magnet for the strange and the curious. It takes a certain kind of person to want to be scared, you know? I never understood it personally. I never understood why you would want to feel your skin crawl. On this particular October night, my compliance didn't much matter. My normal night was determined to wilt and change. The quiet evening shed off its skin and transformed into something else before I could tell what was happening. From my seat behind the security monitors, I spotted a man wandering an empty floor of the garage. He was dressed uncharacteristically well for the area. I figured he was drunk and turned around, confused by the peculiar layout of the garage. That happened pretty often, you see. I don't know who built or designed the structure, but there were stairwells that only linked specific floors. Doors that seemed to lead nowhere. If you didn't follow the marked path, it was easy to get lost or confused. It happened to me the first few nights I worked there. You would guide a guest back to the safety of the street at least once a week. I made my way to the empty level of the garage and called out for the stranger. Now that I was on the floor, I couldn't see him. His only way out would have led him past me, so I knew he hadn't escaped on his own. Where did he go? I checked around the support pillars and peeked into a few of the maintenance doors. There wasn't a man or woman to be found. I was alone. And then I wasn't. I turned around suddenly and saw him. He was standing in the middle of the garage, exactly where I'd expected him the first time. Somehow I'd overlooked him on my approach. If he was there all along, I must have passed him at least 3 times as my search intensified. I called out again. This time my words made the stranger turn toward me. That's when I first saw the mask. His face still looked human enough, but his skin looked like it was covered in scales. His nose was flat and his lips were thin. He looked like something had stepped out of a science fiction show. I believed right away that he was an actor. He was supposed to be in the haunted house, I thought. Pre-gamed a little too early and wandered off of the beaten path. When I approached him, reaching out my hand to signal that I was there to help, he blinked. His eyelids moved from right to left. As his vision focused on me, I watched his eyes roll independently of one another. His gaze clicked onto my position, one half at a time. Then his lips twitched up his face in a poor mockery of a smile. His teeth were short and looked like they'd been filed down. No man could have been born with teeth like that. I ignored the pit in my stomach and tried to swallow the anxious spit that had filled my mouth. I made a quick rationalization. It was a costume. The makeup or the prosthetics or whatever they were wearing, they were top of the line. I wouldn't know any differently, would I? I tried to open my mouth and return to the routine. "Can I help you back to the street? Can I help you find your car?" I stumbled over the words. And as I watched, staring at this man without so much as blinking or looking away, he changed. Those scales shimmered and started to take on a different color. Before a minute had passed, the ridges on his skin weren't so visible, and the color was a lot closer to my own. His lips seemed to fill out, and with a bit of effort, I could see him blinking normally, looking right like a man, except for the teeth that remained pointed. He changed almost completely, blended in. Is that why I didn't see him when I first reached that floor? Then the stranger mimicked my gesture from moments ago. He reached toward me. His body language said, "Let me help," but my mind was already screaming to run. I did exactly that. I got out of there as quickly as I could, all the way down and out, juggling my cell phone and trying to call my coworkers. I couldn't stay there. I didn't. I tried explaining what I saw as I was leaving, but my peers were being a little too stubborn. Their minds were made up early on. They figured I was the one who'd gotten confused. I could tell that they were worried about me, but they weren't helping my situation. None of them saw the man that night. It was business as usual, or so they said. A couple weirdos coming to visit the haunted house, nothing more. But I knew better. I still know better. Maybe it isn't just the strange people that get called out by the autumn weather. Maybe it's just the strange in general, the most peculiar things that walk this earth. Like a man with lizard skin, with eyes that closed the wrong way, and teeth that were a little too sharp. What do you think? Have you ever seen something like that? Have you ever locked eyes with somebody and just knew that something was wrong with them? You'd know better than me, I guess. Did I imagine that?